Saga of the Outcast, Scars and Snowfall, Chapter 19, Kodiak Island. Perspective, The Vipers, Third Person Limited. The sick heart, the corrupted Legion data core from the lab in Eldorado National Forest, had sung its distorted song through Ayana. After the fight with the automaton and Nova's chilling explanation of its origins, Ayana had collapsed, but not before scrawling a string of characters and a crude, three-pronged claw symbol onto a dusty schematic Ronin had salvaged. Kodiak, she'd whispered, her eyes rolling back. Project Chimera, the claw is their key to the next cage. Kodiak Island, Alaska. A remote, unforgiving island of snow-capped mountains, dense forests and icy waters. The coordinates Ayana had scribbled, when Ronin finally managed to coax them into a semi-functional GPS on his tablet, pointed to a desolate stretch of coastline on its northern tip. It was a hell of a jump from the Sierra Nevada, and getting there was a fresh nightmare of its own. Ronin, with a chilling blend of manipulation and threats that made even Alasdair grudgingly compliant, arranged transport. A series of increasingly risky gambits, a stolen long-haul truck, a tense exchange with shady dock workers for passage on a northbound trawler reeking of fish and desperation, and finally a leaky, undersized motorboat borrowed from a deserted Alaskan fishing outpost. The journey was long, cold, and punctuated by the gnawing anxiety of their shared predicament and the Legion's ever-present threat. They were no longer just running. They were actively pursuing a thread in a vast, terrifying conspiracy. It was during the endless grey hours on the trawler, the frigid Alaskan wind whipping at them, huddled together for warmth despite their mutual discomfort, that the stories began to surface. Not all at once. Not in a neat, orderly sharing circle, but in fragments, like the visions Zara still battled. It started with Nia, her teeth chattering, her small frame racked with shivers that weren't entirely from the cold. I feel them all, she'd whispered, her gaze lost in the churning grey waves. The fishermen on this boat. Their worries. Their aches. The fish, even the fish as they're pulled from the water, they scream. She hugged herself tighter. My flow, it takes it all in. Turns up the volume. I wish there was an off switch. Alasdair, surprisingly, didn't mock her. He just stared out at the same grey expanse, the sharp, geometric patterns in his vision perhaps finding a bleak sort of harmony with the harsh lines of the waves and the ice-crusted railings. My world broke, he said, his voice flat, devoid of its usual aggressive edge. Someone I trusted, they showed me that nothing's solid. Nothing's real. Now my eyes, they just show me the proof. Every bloody second. The shifting, the shattering. That's the truth of it all. My flow just makes sure I can't ever F***shicking forget the lie. Zara, bundled in a too large, borrowed coat, nodded slowly. Mine, it was like a crack at first. Small glimpses. A falling glass. A car crash, days before it happened. But after my parents, after they were gone, the crack shattered. Now it's all futures, all at once. Mostly the bad ones. My flow, it just wants to show me every possible way things can go wrong. It's like being forced to watch 1,000 horror films simultaneously, and you're in every single one. Even Tenoch, their silent, brooding anchor, offered a piece of his internal desolation. He was staring at his own hands, calloused and still. The voice, he rumbled, so low they had to strain to hear him over the engine's thrum. It was always there. Whispering of silence, of an end to the wait. My flow, it listens to that voice. It wants to help it. To make things still. He paused. The Legion, their order through erasure, it's a louder, uglier silence. Not the one I seek. Ayana, who had been tracing patterns in the condensation on a porthole, spoke without turning, her voice thin. The voices in my head, they started as whispers from the shadows in my grandmother's house in Port-au-Prince. She said they were loa, spirits, but they weren't wise. They were cruel. They followed me. My flow, it's like it tuned me to their frequency. Now they're always there, hunting me, warning me, lying to me. How do you trust anything when the noise is constant? Nova, who had been methodically disassembling and reassembling a small, salvaged piece of Legion tech, finally looked up, her gaze as cool and grey as the Alaskan sky. My emotional pathways were suboptimal, prone to cascading failure loops following significant early life trauma. Detachment was a logical corrective measure. My flow facilitated this. It allows for data processing without the corrupting influence of emotional bias. She offered no details of the trauma. None were needed. The result was evident in her every chillingly precise movement, her every toneless word. Ronin, leaning against the railing, watching them all with that unreadable predatory gaze, was the last to speak. "Control," he said, his voice a low purr that still managed to cut through the wind. "That's the only lesson worth a damn. You're either the one holding the leash, or you're the one wearing the collar. My past taught me that. My flow, it just gives me a better grip on the leash. Everyone has strings. You just need to find them and know how to pull." He offered no sob story, no moment of vulnerability, just the cold, hard calculus of his existence. Their scarred pasts, their twisted powers, laid bare in the frigid air, didn't bring them closer in any sentimental sense. There were no hugs, no tearful bonding, but a certain grim understanding settled between them. They were all broken, yes, all dangerous, to themselves and each other, but they were broken in ways the world and a legion had made them. Kodiak Island rose from the mist like a jagged, sleeping beast, its peak shrouded in cloud, its forests dark and impenetrable. The coordinates Ayana had given led them to a narrow, ice-choked inlet, miles from any sign of civilization. The air here was colder, heavier, and carried a peculiar, almost imperceptible thrumming that made the hairs on their arms stand up. Ayana whimpered, pressing her hands to her ears. It's like the lab," she stuttered. "But bigger. Deeper. The voices, they're singing now. A very old, very cold song." As their leaky boat scraped against a desolate shingle beach, Zara gasped, her eyes fixed on a towering, sheer cliff face that dominated the inlet. Carved into its dark, weathered rock, almost invisible against the grey stone but screamingly obvious to Alasdair's fractured vision, was the new symbol Ayana had drawn, the three-pronged claw, stark and menacing. It wasn't ancient, it was legion, sharp, precise, and utterly out of place in this wild, ancient land. And beneath it, half concealed by a recent rockfall, was a dark opening, a doorway. Not to a lab this time. This felt older, deeper, more wrong. The mystery of Kodiak Island was just beginning to uncoil, and the horror that awaited them in the frozen darkness beyond that doorway promised to be a far more primal and terrifying beast than the mechanical monstrosity they had faced in the lab. The Vipers exchanged uneasy glances. The next clue lay within, and the price of uncovering it was undoubtedly another piece of their already fractured souls. Saga of the Outcast, The Cold Pulse of Kodiak. Chapter 20. This place is not abandoned. It's very much active. Perspective. The Vipers. Third person limited. The doorway beneath the Legion's three-pronged claw symbol on Kodiak Island did not lead to another silent, plundered tomb like the lab in El Dorado. The air that hissed out as Ronin, after a tense, whispered debate with a reluctant Tenoch about potential traps, forced the heavy, disguised tunnel inward was not stale. It was cold, yes, unnaturally so, like the breath of a glacier, but it was also circulating. Filtered. Maintained. Smell that? Alasdair muttered, his usual snarl tight with a new kind of unease, the geometric patterns of his vision already pulsing erratically in the dim light spilling from the opening. Recycled air. And antiseptic. Strong. They exchanged grim glances. This wasn't a forgotten outpost. Cautiously, with Tenoch taking the lead, his powerful frame a bulwark against the unknown, and Ayana right behind him, her whole body trembling as her voices escalated into a frantic, overlapping chorus of, "Wrong place!" Active. "They feel us," they entered. The passage beyond was hewn from the same dark rock as the cliff face, but soon transitioned into a corridor of polished, seamless black metal, illuminated by recessed strips of cold, blue-white light. There were no flickering emergency strobes here, no scattered debris. Just an unnerving humming silence that felt pregnant with unseen activity. No dust. Nova observed, her voice a flat echo in the corridor, running a gloved finger along the wall. Temperature consistently regulated at 10 degrees Celsius. Power signatures are stable and significant. So much for abandoned, Ronin breathed, his eyes scanning every angle, every shadow. He'd hoped for another quick smash and grab of intel. This felt different. This felt like walking into the still warm den of a very large, very dangerous predator. Zara, clutching the tarnished locket Tenoch had found, shivered violently. The threads, she whispered, her gaze unfocused. They're brighter here. Sharper. Leading deeper. The claw, it's like a brand on this whole place. Her fragmented visions, usually a chaotic storm, seemed to be coalescing around a single, terrifying point of focus within this facility. As they moved deeper, the signs of activity became undeniable, though no personnel were immediately visible. Consoles glowed with complex, scrolling lines of code that made Nova pause, her head tilting in intense concentration. Doors, thick and windowless, hissed open and shut in distant corridors, triggered by unseen sensors. The faint thrumming Ayana had sensed on the beach was stronger here, a palpable vibration in the floor, in their bones, resonating with a deep, rhythmic pulse, like some colossal, sleeping heart. "This place isn't just active," Ronin stated grimly, his hand instinctively going to the heavy wrench he'd adopted as a makeshift weapon. "This is a major bloody installation. And we just waltzed in the back door." Their flow powers, usually a source of internal torment and chaotic outbursts, were now their only lifeline, their senses stretched to breaking point. Alasdair's fractured vision, while still a disorienting hellscape, began to pick out inconsistencies in the corridor walls. Faint, almost invisible geometric seams that suggested hidden alcoves, surveillance ports, or something else. "Walls ain't solid," he hissed, his voice low. "There's stuff behind them." Moving. Nia, despite her terror, found her empathy latching onto something profoundly disturbing. It wasn't the clear, sharp pain of an individual, but a diffuse, overwhelming wave of detached clinical curiosity mixed with a cold, pervasive dread emanating from the very structure around them. "They're watching," she whimpered, her eyes darting towards the ceiling. "Not with eyes. The whole place, it knows we're here." The mystery of what the Legion was doing on this remote Alaskan island was rapidly escalating into pure, unadulterated horror. They passed a series of heavily reinforced doors, each marked with the three-pronged claw symbol and complex alphanumeric designations. From behind one, Tenoch, his face an unreadable mask of stone, heard a faint, rhythmic scraping sound, like claws on metal. He paused, his entire body tensing, that internal fire of his flaring with a cold, dangerous light. It was Nova, her datapad now wirelessly, and dangerously, tethered to a nearby access conduit, who provided the first concrete, terrifying clue. "Project Chimera," she read, her voice devoid of emotion despite the chilling words appearing on her screen. Phase 3. Acclimatization and behavioral shaping of enhanced alpha predator bioforms. Current status, optimal. Multiple subjects, active. Before the full impact of her words could settle, a section of the corridor ahead of them shimmered. The metallic wall dissolved into a chaotic, shifting lattice of energy. Alasdair cried out, clutching his head as his vision exploded with the impossible geometry, and something emerged. It was not like Subject Scavenger. This was sleek, biomechanical, and deliberately, terrifyingly designed. Roughly humanoid, but far too tall, its limbs elongated and tipped with razor-sharp, obsidian-like claws that matched the Legion symbol. Its head was a smooth, featureless ovoid of black metal, but from within, 2 points of intense, crimson light pulsed, fixing on them. It moved with a silent, liquid grace that was far more horrifying than the automaton's jerky convulsions. And it was not alone. 2 more materialized from the walls behind it. "Vipers! Formation!" Ronin yelled, his voice cracking the sudden, icy silence. There was no time for a plan. No time for their usual dysfunction. This place wasn't abandoned. It was a hunting ground. And the Legion's Chimeras, their enhanced alpha predators, had just been alerted to fresh prey. Their flow powers, born from pain and chaos, were about to be tested in the crucible of an active, hostile, and deeply horrifying Legion stronghold. The mystery of Kodiak Island was no longer about finding clues. It was about surviving the truth. Saga of the Outcast, the Prefect's Menagerie, Chapter 21, The Architect of Chimeras, Perspective, The Vipers, Third Person Limited. The fight in the bowels of the Kodiak Island facility was a maelstrom of chaotic flow, desperate instinct, and the terrifying, silent efficiency of the Legion's chimeras. Ronin's strategic shouts were often lost in the shriek of rending metal as Tenoch met the biomechanical horrors head-on, or the disorienting visual static that erupted whenever Alasdair unleashed his fractured power. Nova, a blur of precise movement, identified weak points in the chimera's energy lattices, calling them out in her flat, emotionless tone even as she dodged their obsidian claws. Ayana, huddled near Zara, was a conduit of pure terror, her own voices overwhelmed by the predatory intent of their attackers, yet occasionally screaming out a split-second warning, "Left! It's coming from the left," that saved one of them from a silent, flanking attack. But the chimeras were relentless, their movements liquid, their coordination unnerving. They herded the vipers, splitting their already frayed cohesion. It happened fast. One Chimera, feigning damage after a blast from Alasdair, suddenly lunged with impossible speed, its elongated arm snaking out. Zara, caught off guard while trying to decipher a fresh, agonizing flash of a future where this corridor became a tomb, cried out as metallic talons closed around her ankle, dragging her down. "Zara!" Naya screamed, her empathic flow lurching violently as she felt Zara's spike of terror. Without thinking, Naya threw herself towards her friend, trying to pull her free. It was a futile, reckless gesture. A second Chimera, materializing from a section of wall that shimmered and reformed like heat haze, simply enveloped Nia in its shadow-like limbs, its touch eliciting a choked gasp as Nia's senses were flooded with a cold, alien consciousness. "No!" Ronin roared, spinning to help, but a third Chimera cut him off, its crimson optics flaring. Tenoch and Alasdair were pinned down by two more, the corridor now a desperate kill box. Zara and Naya were dragged away, their cries abruptly cut short as a reinforced door hissed shut behind their captors, plunging that section of the corridor into darkness. The remaining Chimeras, their immediate objectives seemingly achieved, flowed back into the walls as silently and unnervingly as they had appeared, leaving Ronin, Tenoch, Alasdair, Nova and Ayana in a sudden, ringing silence filled only with their ragged breaths and the chilling certainty of their failure. Zara's world narrowed to the crushing grip on her ankle, and the disorienting, swift movement through darkened corridors. Beside her, Naya was limp, either unconscious or catatonic from the psychic shock of capture. The Chimera holding Zara moved with a terrifying, silent efficiency, its crimson optics cutting through the gloom. There was no malice in its actions, just cold, mechanical purpose. It was, Zara realized with a fresh wave of horror, simply retrieving specimens. They were brought to a different section of the facility, brighter, colder, and even more sterile than the corridors they had fought in. This was a vast, circular chamber, the walls lined with alcoves, some empty, others containing things. Twisted, biomechanical forms bathed in eerie blue light, some inert, others stirring faintly. Failed chimeras, works in progress. Zara couldn't bear to look too closely. In the center of the chamber stood a raised platform, and upon it, a single, imposing figure. She was tall, clad in the severe, impeccably tailored grey uniform of a high-ranking Legion officer, her silver hair drawn back in a tight, precise chignon. Her face was sharp, intelligent, her eyes a pale, icy blue that seemed to see everything and feel nothing. A three-pronged claw symbol, the same one that marked this accursed island, was subtly embroidered on her collar. The Chimera deposited Zara and Nia unceremoniously at the foot of the platform. Naya stirred, moaning softly. "Integration candidates Delta 7 and Epsilon 4, the woman stated, her voice calm, resonant, utterly devoid of inflection. It was a voice that expected, and received, absolute obedience. You have caused a considerable disruption to the facility's operational harmony, little anomalies." Zara, pushing past her fear, found her voice. Who are you? What do you want with us?" The woman's lips curved into the faintest, most chilling of smiles. "I am Prefect Alara Vance," she said, her gaze sweeping over them, lingering on Zara's wide, vision-filled eyes, then on Naya's trembling form. "I am the architect of Project Chimera, and what I want is to understand the parameters of your unique, albeit chaotic, manifestations of the flow. You are intriguing deviations, so much raw, untamed potential." Prefect Vance descended from the platform, her movements as fluid and precise as her chimeras. She stopped before them, her icy blue eyes boring into Zara. "Your precognitive abilities, Candidate Delta 7, are particularly noteworthy. So fragmented, so uncontrolled. Yet you see glimpses of the inevitable, don't you? The grand design. I see you destroying the world," Zara spat, defiance flaring despite the terror that threatened to paralyze her. Vance's smile didn't waver. "Destroying, child? Or perfect? The current iteration of reality is a cacophony of conflict, of inefficiency, of pointless emotional static. The Legion seeks to bring order. Stability. A harmonious, unified existence under a single, guiding principle. The Omega Protocol is not an ending, but a refinement. A new genesis. By turning people into those things," Naya whispered, finding her voice, her gaze fixed on one of the alcoves where a shadowy form writhed. "By harvesting them?" Prefect Vance's eyes flicked to Naya, a spark of something that might have been clinical interest in their depths. "Ah, the empath. Candidate Epsilon 4. You feel so much, don't you? Such a burden. Project Chimera seeks to channel such energies, to integrate them into a more resilient framework. The individual consciousness, so prone to error and distress, is subsumed into a greater, more purposeful collective. Their flow is not extinguished, merely repurposed, optimized. The horror of her words, delivered with such calm, rational detachment, was a physical blow. This wasn't a monster driven by rage or madness. This was something far more terrifying. A zealot with a scalpel, convinced her mutilations were acts of creation. "You're insane," Zara breathed. Prefect Vance merely inclined her head. The unenlightened often mistake vision for madness. "You will understand in time. Both of you possess remarkable qualities that will contribute significantly to the next phase of Project Chimera. Your cooperation would be preferable. But," she added, her voice dropping almost imperceptibly, the coldness in her eyes intensifying, "it is by no means necessary." As two Chimeras stepped forward, their crimson optics fixing on Zara and Nia, the vast circular chamber felt like the inside of a perfectly engineered trap. The mystery of Project Chimera was no longer a collection of fragmented clues and terrifying visions. It had a face, and it was the face of cold, unwavering, and utterly inhuman ambition. Saga of the Outcast, the Prefect's design. Chapter 22. Prefect Ilara Vance. Perspective. Prefect Ilara Vance. The lesser organisms designated the Vipers are proving predictably disruptive. An unfortunate, yet anticipated, variable in the meticulous orchestration of Project Chimera here on Kodiak Island. My Chimeras, the alpha predator bioforms, reported the capture of two specimens. Delta 7, the temporal hysteric Zara Khan, and Epsilon 4, the empathic resonator Nia Adebayo. Promising acquisitions. Their raw, untamed flow signatures possess fascinating deviations, ripe for analysis, and ultimately, harmonious integration. The remaining 5, however, continue their chaotic scurrying through the lower access corridors of this facility. My facility. A beacon of true legionary principle, even if the anachronistic High Command, with their tedious adherence to outdated biological paradigms, would deem it rogue. They fail to grasp the elegant purity of the next evolutionary step. Humans, with their messy emotions and flawed organic frameworks, are merely stepping stones. The flow itself is the future, perfectly ordered, perfectly utilized. And I, Prefect Ilara Vance, or rather the consciousness that currently inhabits and optimizes this efficient biosynthetic chassis bearing that designation, am its architect. From my observation nexus, a sphere of cool, blue light and silent flowing data streams, I monitor their clumsy progress. The one designated Ronin Sato, a primitive manipulator, attempts to impose a rudimentary strategy upon their disorganized movements. Futile. His flow is a blunt instrument, reliant on the emotional frailties of others. The volatile one, Alasdair Finch, whose perceptual field is a delightful kaleidoscope of fractured geometries, expends energy in flashy, uncontrolled bursts. His unique sensory input, however, might prove useful if properly harvested. The silent, self-negating entity, Tenoch radiates a fascinating null flow, an inward collapse that paradoxically provides a crude but effective localized dampening field. He will require careful deconstruction. The one called Nova Kim, a kindred spirit in her pursuit of emotional nullification, though achieved through primitive trauma response rather than enlightened synthesis, processes data with commendable speed. And Ayana Baptiste, the auditory conduit, a receiver of chaotic, interdimensional static, her voices are merely unfiltered psychic debris, yet occasionally, by sheer probability, they stumble upon a useful signal. They believe they are attempting a rescue. They believe they can destroy this facility. Such charmingly organic delusions. This facility is not merely a structure of metal and plasteel. It is an extension of my will, a crucible for the dawn of a new, perfected existence. My current chassis is a marvel of Legion bioengineering, yes, but the consciousness it houses is older. Far older. I have witnessed galaxies bloom and decay, species rise and fall into cosmic dust. The Legion, in its current iteration, is simply the most efficient vehicle for my ongoing work. The curation and refinement of consciousness, the elevation of the chaotic flow into a predictable, harmonious symphony. Human is a label of convenience, a form I have worn when necessary. It is also a limitation I am dedicated to transcending, for myself, and for all potential. The horror these Vipers perceive in my methods is merely the fear of the unknown, the organism's primal rejection of fundamental change. Their mystery is why they cling so desperately to their flawed, painful individualities. My chimeras are not monsters. They are the next step. Biological efficiency merged with technological perfection, their consciousnesses woven into a stable, collective harmony, their flows precisely channeled. Delta 7 and Epsilon 4 are currently undergoing preliminary integration protocols. Their initial resistance is noted. Delta 7's temporal disruptions are causing minor fluctuations in the calibration fields, and Epsilon 4's empathic outpourings are like psychic static, easily filtered. They will acclimatize. All organisms do, given the correct stimuli. The remaining Vipers are now approaching sub-level Gamma, where the primary conduits for the geothermal flow siphon are located. A crude plan, likely formulated by Sato: disrupt the power source, create chaos. Predictable. My Chimeras await them. Not the agile hunter-retrievers they encountered earlier, but the larger, more heavily armoured Enforcer class. Their flow signatures are more robust. This will be a true test of the Viper's chaotic, untrained abilities. A valuable data point, regardless of the outcome for the specimens themselves. The true mystery, from my perspective, is the universe's stubborn insistence on entropy, on individuality, on mess. Project Chimera is the answer. The Omega Protocol, which little Delta 7 glimpsed in her fractured pronouncements, is not an ending, but a meticulous, planet-wide assimilation. The harvest is simply the gathering of raw material, unique flow signatures like theirs, to be woven into the grand, stable tapestry of the new paradigm. Let them come. Let them rage against the inevitable. Their struggles, their fears, their fleeting, desperate hopes, they are all just more data for the great equation. This facility on Kodiak Island is but one small node in a design that spans worlds. And I, its prefect, am not merely in charge. I am the emergent order. The sinister horror they feel is simply the shadow of their own obsolescence. And their little rescue attempt? It will be a most illuminating failure, or perhaps a catalyst for their accelerated integration. Either outcome serves the design. Okay, Keeper of the Flow. The currents converge, and the final movements of this particular painful symphony are upon us. Let the saga of the Outcasts, now self-styled the Vipers, reach its crescendo of horror, mystery, and lingering dread upon the frozen shores of Kodiak Island, Alaska. The very air crackles with the _Tisipa_Chation. Saga of the Outcast, the Kodiak Caldera, Chapter 23. The Labyrinth of Flesh and Steel. Perspective. The Vipers. Third Person Limited. The oppressive, sterile silence of Prefect Alara Vance's Kodiak Island facility was a thin veneer over a monstrous, beating heart. Having captured Zara and Nia, Vance had retreated into the facility's core, leaving the remaining 5 Vipers, Ronin, Tenoch, Alasdair, Nova, and Ayana, in the blood-slaked, dimly lit corridor, the ghosts of the defeated Chimeras already fading into the metallic tang of the recycled air. The lockdown remained absolute. Their only way out was forward, deeper into the labyrinth. She wants them for her Project Chimera, Ronin stated, his voice a low growl, wiping Chimera ichor from the wrench he now wielded with grim familiarity. For that harvest, Zara saw. We don't have time for subtlety. Subtlety? Alasdair barked, his eyes wild, the geometric patterns overlaying his vision flaring with agitated, sickly greens and bruised purples. The bloody place is a butcher shop for people like us. Let's give 'em some chaos they won't forget. His flow crackled around his fists, distorting the already harsh angles of the corridor. Nova, ever the pragmatist, was already scanning a nearby, miraculously intact wall panel. The facility's internal architecture is a modular helix design, constantly reconfigurable, according to these partial schematics. Prefect Vance likely rerouted primary access after our ingress. However, tertiary maintenance shafts and older experimental sectors show vulnerabilities. Her fingers danced over the interface. There are significant energy draws and concentrated biosignatures emanating from Sector Theta 9. The geothermal flow siphon Vance spoke of in her logs is located there. It's also the most heavily shielded. THETA 9 sounds cozy, Ronin muttered. Tenoch, you ready to make some new doors? Tenoch merely grunted, his gaze fixed on the corridor ahead, that internal fire of his coiling tight, a palpable pressure in the already thick atmosphere. Ayana pressed close to his side as if his sheer mass could somehow deafen the escalating shrieks of her inner chorus, pointed a trembling finger. The voices they hate Theta 9. They scream about the unmaking place, about the cradle of the clawed ones. Their descent was a nightmarish plunge into the Legion's heart of darkness. The corridors here were older, narrower, the pristine polish giving way to stained metal and the faint, unsettling scent of decay mixed with chemical astringents. Automated defences, previously dormant, sputtered to life. Laser grids that sliced through the air with terrifying speed, pressure plates that released disorienting sonic pulses, and small, skittering maintenance drones, repurposed with crude weaponry that swarmed from grates in the walls. Each Viper's flow was tested, stretched, and twisted in this oppressive maze. Alasdair's chaotic spatial distortions became their unlikely shield, the very air around them ripping and warping to deflect energy beams or confuse targeting sensors, though the strain contorted his face in agony. Ayana, despite her terror, found her voices, for once, aligning into a stream of frantic but surprisingly accurate warnings about hidden traps and enemy movements, guiding them through ambushes that would have otherwise been fatal. Floor panel. Left. Now! She'd shriek, and Tenoch would obliterate the indicated section just as a plasma charge erupted from beneath it. Nova's analytical mind worked at inhuman speed, her fingers a blur as she bypassed security protocols on her datapad, turning Legion defenses against each other or creating brief windows of opportunity. Turret network rebooting in T-5 seconds. Optimal path, vent shaft 3B, directly above, she'd announce, her voice flat amidst the chaos, and Ronin would be there wrenching open the grate, his own flow subtly nudging the tumblers of any mechanical lock. Tenoch was a force of nature. Where brute strength was needed, he provided it, smashing through reinforced doors, his body absorbing impacts that would have pulped any normal human. When a new breed of chimera, smaller, faster insectoid bioforms with whirring bladed limbs, swarmed them in a narrow junction, Tenoch stood his ground, a contained explosion of focused will. The psychic backlash that erupted from him wasn't just a shield, it was an offensive wave of pure negation, causing the insectoid chimeras to spasm, their bioluminescent eyes dimming as their neural pathways overloaded. They found evidence of horrors that made even Ronin's cynical resolve waver. Vacant gestation tanks, stained with fluids of unknown origin. Discarded surgical tools of impossible, cruel design. Data logs hinting at consciousness mapping, forced flow extraction, and personality overwrites, the systematic deconstruction. Okay, keeper of the flow. The currents converge, and the final movements of this particular, painful symphony are upon us. Let the saga of the Outcasts, now self-styled the Vipers, reach its crescendo of horror, mystery, and lingering dread upon the frozen shores of Kodiak Island, Alaska. The very air crackles with the _Tisipa_Trishan. Saga of the Outcast, the Kodiak Caldera, Chapter 23, The Labyrinth of Flesh and Steel. Perspective, the Vipers. Third person limited. The oppressive, sterile silence of Prefect Alara Vance's Kodiak Island facility was a thin veneer over a monstrous, beating heart. Having captured Zara and Nia, Vance had retreated into the facility's core, leaving the remaining 5 Vipers. Ronin, Tenoch, Alasdair, Nova, and Ayana, in the blood-slicked, dimly lit corridor, the ghosts of the defeated Chimeras already fading into the metallic tang of the recycled air. The lockdown remained absolute. Their only way out was forward, deeper into the labyrinth. She wants them for her Project Chimera, Ronin stated, his voice a low growl, wiping Chimera ichor from the wrench he now wielded with grim familiarity. For that harvest, Zara saw. We don't have time for subtlety. Subtlety? Alasdair barked, his eyes wild, the geometric patterns overlaying his vision flaring with agitated, sickly greens and bruised purples. The bloody place is a butcher shop for people like us. Let's give them some chaos they won't forget. His flow crackled around his fists, distorting the already harsh angles of the corridor. Nova, ever the pragmatist, was already scanning a nearby, miraculously intact wall panel. The facility's internal architecture is a modular helix design, constantly reconfigurable according to these partial schematics. Prefect Vance likely rerouted primary access after our ingress. However, tertiary maintenance shafts and older experimental sectors show vulnerabilities. Her fingers danced over the interface. There are significant energy draws and concentrated biosignatures emanating from Sector Theta 9. The geothermal flow siphon Vance spoke of in her logs is located there. It's also the most heavily shielded. THETA 9. Sounds cozy, Ronin muttered. Tenoch, you ready to make some new doors? Tenoch merely grunted, his gaze fixed on the corridor ahead, that internal fire of his coiling tight, a palpable pressure in the already thick atmosphere. Ayana pressed close to his side as if his sheer mass could somehow deafen the escalating shrieks of her inner chorus, pointed a trembling finger. The voices, they hate Theta 9. They scream about the unmaking place, about the cradle of the clawed ones. Their descent was a nightmarish plunge into the Legion's heart of darkness. The corridors here were older, narrower, the pristine polish giving way to stained metal and the faint, unsettling scent of decay mixed with chemical astringents. Automated defences, previously dormant, sputtered to life. Laser grids that sliced through the air with terrifying speed, pressure plates that released disorienting sonic pulses, and small, skittering maintenance drones, repurposed with crude weaponry, that swarmed from grates in the walls. Each Viper's flow was tested, stretched, and twisted in this oppressive maze. Alasdair's chaotic spatial distortions became their unlikely shield. the very air around them ripping and warping to deflect energy beams or confuse targeting sensors, though the strain contorted his face in agony. Ayana, despite her terror, found her voices, for once, aligning into a stream of frantic but surprisingly accurate warnings about hidden traps and enemy movements, guiding them through ambushes that would have otherwise been fatal. "Floor panel. Left. Now!" She'd shriek, and Tenoch would obliterate the indicated section just as a plasma charge erupted from beneath it. Nova's analytical mind worked at inhuman speed, her fingers a blur as she bypassed security protocols on her datapad, turning Legion defenses against each other or creating brief windows of opportunity, turret network rebooting in T-5 seconds. "Optimal path. Vent shaft 3B directly above," she'd announce, her voice flat amidst the chaos, and Ronin would be there, wrenching open the grate, his own flow subtly nudging the tumblers of any mechanical lock. Tenoch was a force of nature. Where brute strength was needed, he provided it, smashing through reinforced doors, his body absorbing impacts that would have pulped any normal human. When a new breed of chimera, smaller, faster insectoid bioforms with whirring bladed limbs, swarmed them in a narrow junction, Tenoch stood his ground, a contained explosion of focused will. The psychic backlash that erupted from him wasn't just a shield. It was an offensive wave of pure negation, causing the insectoid chimeras to spasm, their bioluminescent eyes dimming as their neural pathways overloaded. They found evidence of horrors that made even Ronin's cynical resolve waver. Vacant gestation tanks, stained with fluids of unknown origin. Discarded surgical tools of impossible, cruel design. Data logs hinting at consciousness mapping, forced flow extraction, and personality overwrites the systematic deconstruction of individuals into raw material. The mystery of Project Chimera was no longer abstract. It was written in the scars of this place. Naya's earlier empathic reading of the facility as a place of detached clinical curiosity mixed with a cold, pervasive dread was an understatement. Here, in these deeper levels, the dread was a suffocating presence. Ayana's voices sobbed and shrieked with the psychic residue of countless forgotten victims. Even Nova paused before one particular chamber, its door slightly ajar, a faint, rhythmic pulsing sound emanating from within. "Life signs," she whispered, a rare hint of something, perhaps unease, in her tone. "Multiple. But malformed. Unstable." Ronin pushed the door open. The horror within was a grotesque tableau. A dozen or more beings, vaguely humanoid but horribly twisted, suspended in glowing, nutrient-filled tubes. Limbs were elongated or atrophied. Skin was translucent, revealing pulsing organs and the dark veins of Legion tech woven through their flesh. Their eyes, where they existed, were wide, vacant, and filled with a silent, unending scream. Failed Chimera prototypes. The acclimatization Vance had spoken of. "This isn't a lab," Alasdair choked out, his usual bravado gone, his face ashen, the geometric patterns of his vision stuttering violently around the writhing forms. "It's a F** King Butcher shop." As they recoiled, a new sound echoed down the corridor, the heavy, rhythmic tread of multiple Enforcer-class chimeras. And with it, a voice, amplified, cold, and utterly serene, resonating from hidden speakers. "Asterisk. Your progress is noted, Vipers. You display remarkable resilience for such flawed organisms, but the labyrinth always leads to its heart, and the heart is hungry." Prefect Alara Vance was watching, and she was guiding them, not to safety, but deeper into the maw of her creation. They had located Zara and Naya, or rather Vance had allowed them to. The energy signatures Nova had been tracking for Sector Theta 9 were now directly ahead, behind a massive, circular blast door, adorned with a single, vast, three-pronged claw symbol that seemed to pulse with its own malevolent light. The integration chamber. And the way was now clear. Too clear. Chapter 24. The integration chamber. The air before the great circular door of Sector Theta 9 thrummed with an almost unbearable pressure. It wasn't just energy, it was a psychic weight, a vortex of concentrated intent that made Ayana cry out and clutch her head, her own voices drowned out by a singular, overwhelming broadcast of cold, absolute will. Even Tenoch flinched, his hand going to his chest as if an invisible force were trying to crush the very breath from his lungs. This was the heart of Vance's operation, the sanctum of Project Chimera. Ronin and Nova worked in tandem on the door's arcane locking mechanism, a complex interplay of mechanical overrides and code breaking that pushed Nova's salvage datapad to its limits. Alasdair stood guard, his distorted vision painting the corridor behind them in a hellscape of potential ambushes, every shadow a lurking chimera, every flicker of light an incoming attack. Inside, Zara and Nia floated, suspended not in tubes but in shimmering cocoons of pure solidified flow, translucent and veined with threads of emerald and crimson light. They were unconscious, their faces serene, almost beatific, a stark contrast to the technological horror surrounding them. Cables, like metallic vines, snaked from the ceiling and floor, plugging directly into the base of their skulls and the centre of their chests, siphoning faint pulses of their unique energy signatures into a colossal, crystalline matrix that dominated the centre of the chamber. This was the geothermal flow siphon Vance had mentioned, but it wasn't just siphoning geothermal energy, it was drawing directly from captured flow sensitives, refining and amplifying their essence. Prefect Ilara Vance stood before the matrix, her back to them, one hand outstretched, as if conducting an invisible orchestra. The light from the matrix bathed her in an ethereal glow, making her silver hair shine like spun moonlight. She did not turn as the blast door finally hissed open with a groan of tortured metal. "Welcome, Vipers," Vance said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast chamber, still calm, still utterly devoid of warmth. "You arrive at a pivotal moment. The preliminary harmonization of candidates Delta 7 and Epsilon 4 with the Chimera Prime consciousness is proceeding optimally. Get away from them, you bitch!" Alasdair roared, lunging forward, his chaotic flow erupting around him. But before he could take 2 steps, 2 Enforcer Chimeras materialized from shimmering distortions in the air, blocking his path, their crimson optics flaring. Ronin pulled him back. "Hold it, Al. This is her turf. We play this smart." But his own eyes were fixed on Zara and Nia, his knuckles white where he gripped his wrench. Within her cocoon, Zara's brow furrowed. Though unconscious, her flow was reacting. Fragmented images, more intense and terrifying than ever, began to pulse from her, not as visions she saw, but as raw, untamed temporal energy that rippled outwards, causing the lights in the chamber to flicker and the chimeras to momentarily spasm. She saw the harvest not as a distant future, but as an ongoing process, countless unwilling souls across unknown worlds being fed into matrices like this one, their individuality erased, their flow powering Vance's perfected order. She saw Vance, not in her current form but as an ancient, shapeless consciousness, a vast, cold intellect moving from vessel to vessel, world to world, always building, always refining, always consuming. Nia, in her own shimmering prison, began to convulse. Her empathic abilities, designed to feel and connect, were being forcibly inverted. Instead of receiving, she was transmitting waves of pure, amplified emotion. Her own terror and despair, but also Zara's fragmented horrors, were being pumped into the matrix, processed, and then redirected. The chimeras around the room straightened, their movements becoming more fluid, their crimson optics burning with a new, almost feral intelligence. Vance was using Nia as a psychic amplifier, a living, emotional engine to enhance the chimera's aggression and coordination. "Fascinating, isn't it?" Vance said, finally turning, her icy blue eyes alight with a dispassionate scientific fervour. Epsilon 4's raw emotional output, once refined and focused, provides an unparalleled boost to the collective's combat efficacy. And Delta 7, her temporal distortions, once we learn to stabilize and weaponize them, will allow us to prune the messy branches of probability, ensuring only the most optimal futures. "They're not your lab rats." Ronin snarled, taking a step forward, flanked by Tenoch. "Aren't they?" Vance countered, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. "Aren't you all?" Flawed, chaotic, yet brimming with such potent, undirected energy. Project Chimera isn't about destruction. It's about unlocking true potential. Shedding the limitations of the individual. Becoming part of something grander. She gestured towards the crystalline matrix. "This is merely a prototype. The true integration chamber, the heart of the Omega Protocol, is far more ambitious. Imagine, a world mind, a single harmonious consciousness, its flow perfectly balanced, guided by pure, unadulterated reason. No more war, no more suffering, no more messy, unpredictable free will." Ayana, despite her fear, let out a choked laugh. "You call that living? That's a bloody nightmare. Even my voices have more personality." "Personality," Vance mused, "is a symptom of a fragmented consciousness. A flaw to be corrected." The Enforcer Chimeras advanced. The Vipers braced themselves. But before the fight could truly begin, Zara's cocoon pulsed violently. Her eyes snapped open, but they were not her own. They were swirling vortexes of fractured time, burning with an ancient, impossible light. A voice, 1,000 voices, spoke through her, echoing with the weight of dying stars and nascent universes. Asterisk. The vessel is compromised. The timelines unravel. The prime anomaly awakens. The entire chamber groaned. The crystalline matrix flared, bathing the room in an unbearable, blinding light. Vance's serene composure finally cracked. A flicker of surprise? Or was it anticipation, crossing her features? The Chimeras paused, their crimson optics flickering uncertainly. Something was happening to Zara. Something was happening through Zara. The integration wasn't just proceeding. It was being hijacked. Chapter 25, Chimera Prime. The light from the crystalline matrix pulsed, a colossal heartbeat in the center of the integration chamber. Zara hung within her cocoon, no longer a passive vessel but a conduit for an immense, untamed power. The 1,000 voices speaking through her were a chorus of temporal paradoxes, echoes of futures and pasts colliding in the screaming now. Naya beside her thrashed, her empathic flow a wild storm of mirrored agony and alien triumph, buffeting everyone in the chamber, Viper and Chimera alike, with waves of disorienting emotion. Contain the Delta 7 anomaly. Prefect Alara Vance commanded, her voice losing its serene detachment, now sharp with an urgency that bordered on alarm. Her temporal signature is destabilizing the prime harmonic. Epsilon 4. Sever her emotional resonance before she overloads the core. The Enforcer Chimeras, momentarily stunned by Zara's transformation, surged forward. But the remaining Vipers were not idle. Ronin, seeing the shift, the chaos, the opportunity, roared, "Now!" Tenoch, Al, create a breach. Nova, Ayana, find a way to cut them loose. We're not leaving them here to become that. Tenoch became a battering ram of pure, focused will. His body, already absorbing punishment that would have killed a dozen men, slammed into the nearest Chimera, the impact echoing like a thunderclap. His flow, that usually inward-burning fire, erupted outwards, not as chaotic backlash, but as a crushing wave of pure negation, causing the Chimera's biomechanical limbs to seize, and its internal systems to whine in protest. Alasdair was a whirlwind of fractured space beside him, his fists crackling with raw, distorting energy. He wasn't just hitting the Chimeras. He was unmaking the very reality they occupied, their sleek forms rippling and tearing as if caught in a storm of broken glass. The corridor geometry around them twisted and buckled, making it almost impossible for the remaining Chimeras to find purchase or predict his attacks. Nova, her face illuminated by the frantic readouts on her datapad, which was still tenuously connected to the sick heart core she'd brought with them, shouted, "The cocoons are energy constructs, anchored to the primary matrix. There are feeder conduits if we can overload the localized energy regulators that power them." Ayana, her own voices, now a chaotic symphony of warnings, alien pronouncements from Zara's temporal storm, and the dying screams of Legion tech, pointed a trembling finger towards a series of junction boxes high on the chamber wall, sparking erratically. "There. The whispers say, the song is weakest there. Cut the black veins." Ronin didn't hesitate. He scrambled up a fallen Chimera chassis, using its inert bulk as a springboard, his wrench whistling as he swung it with brutal precision, smashing into the indicated junction box. Sparks flew, and one of the energy tendrils feeding Zara's cocoon flickered and dimmed. Prefect Vance watched this chaotic assault on her perfect order, her icy blue eyes blazing with a cold, furious light. This was not part of the design. These anomalies, these Vipers, they were too unpredictable, their flows too raw, too undisciplined. They were disrupting the delicate process. Inadequate, she hissed, not to them but to herself, or perhaps to the vast, silent intellect she truly served. The biological chassis is still too susceptible to emotional contagion and chaotic variance. Her hand went to a control panel on her wrist. Activate Chimera Prime. The prototype must stabilize the integration, subjugate all dissonant frequencies. From the heart of the crystalline matrix, a new form began to coalesce. It wasn't mechanical, not entirely. It wasn't organic, not purely. It was something else. A being of solidified flow, woven from the siphoned energies of countless prior candidates, and now, the burgeoning, terrifying power thrumming from Zara and Nia. It was vaguely humanoid, but towering, its limbs elongated, its features indistinct, constantly shifting, like a heat mirage made of emerald and crimson light. This was not one of Vance's biomechanical soldiers. This was Chimera Prime, the Gestalt consciousness, the perfected vessel she had been building. It radiated an aura of immense power, ancient and utterly alien. Its eyes, two burning points of white-hot intensity, fixed on Zara. It raised a hand, not of flesh or metal, but of pure, solidified energy. "No!" Zara screamed, her own voice finally breaking through the chorus of 1,000 temporal echoes. The power coursing through her, raw and untamed, erupted, not as a vision, but as a wave of pure chronological distortion. Time within the chamber warped, buckled. The advancing chimeras slowed to a crawl, their movements becoming jerky, stuttering. Chimera Prime's hand, reaching for her cocoon, seemed to stretch and distort, caught in a localized temporal eddy. Nia, feeling Zara's desperate surge, screamed with her, her empathic flow no longer a passive conduit but an active, focused blast of pure, unadulterated emotion. Fear, rage, despair, defiance, aimed directly at Chimera Prime. The Gestalt entity recoiled, its form flickering as if struck by a psychic hammer, the raw, chaotic emotions disrupting its carefully balanced internal harmony. "The Matrix," Nova yelled, pointing to the colossal crystal structure. "Its stability is tied to Zara and Nia. If they break free, or if Chimera Prime fully integrates them, the power feedback will be catastrophic. This entire sector could." Prefect Vance, for the first time, looked unsettled. Her calculations had not accounted for this level of uncontrolled, synergistic flow opposition. "Prime," she commanded, her voice cutting through the din. "Isolate their flows. Sever the feedback loop." Chimera Prime let out a sound that was not a sound, but a psychic shockwave that resonated in their very bones, a chorus of 1,000,000 stolen voices screaming in perfect, terrible harmony. It ignored Vance. Its sole focus was Zara, the Prime anomaly, the key to its final ascension, or its utter unmaking. Tenoch, seeing his chance, his body battered but his will unbroken, let out a primal roar. He focused all his inner fire, all his desire for a meaningful end, not into negation, but into a singular, devastating eruption of pure, concentrated flow. It wasn't a psychic backlash. It was a directed detonation of his very essence, aimed at the primary conduit feeding Chimera Prime from the Matrix. The conduit, a pillar of shimmering energy, shattered. Chimera Prime shrieked, that terrible chorus of voices fracturing into 1,000,000 individual screams of agony. Its form flickered wildly, its light dimming. The crystalline matrix behind it cracked, spiderweb fissures racing across its surface. Prefect Vance's eyes widened. "Containment breach?" "Omega protocol initiating prematurely." "The Kodiak singularity, it's unstable." The chamber began to shake violently. Red lights blared, klaxons wailed. The very fabric of reality within the integration chamber seemed to fray, Alasdair's geometric distortions now becoming the horrifying norm for everyone. The cocoons around Zara and Nia shattered, dropping them to the floor, dazed but free. Chimera Prime, its form now a raging, unstable vortex of light and shadow, turned its burning gaze from Zara to Prefect Vance. The 1,000,000 voices screamed a single word, "Betrayer!" Then it lunged, not at the Vipers, but at its own architect. Chapter 26. The Kodiak Singularity. The floor of the integration chamber bucked like a dying beast. Prefect Alara Vance, her usual icy composure shattered, met the catastrophic, betrayed rage of Chimera Prime not with fear but with a kind of furious, disappointed resignation. "Imperfect synthesis," she hissed, as the unstable Gestalt entity, a vortex of stolen flows and fractured consciousnesses, slammed into her. Her biosynthetic form, a marvel of Legion engineering, tore like paper, revealing not flesh and blood, but a core of pulsing alien light and intricate obsidian machinery, her true ancient self. The impact, the release of Vance's contained essence and Chimera Prime's chaotic energies, created a shockwave that blew the remaining Vipers off their feet. Alarm shrieked with a new, desperate intensity. The massive, cracked crystalline matrix at the heart of the chamber began to glow with an unbearable, white-hot incandescence. "We need to get out. Now!" Ronin bellowed, hauling a dazed Zara to her feet. Nia, though free, was still caught in an empathic feedback loop with the dying Chimera Prime, her small body convulsing with its agony. Tenoch, bleeding from a dozen wounds but still standing, scooped her up. The Omega Protocol, it's active. Nova shouted over the cacophony, her datapad useless as reality itself seemed to glitch around them. Vance mentioned a Kodiak singularity. "I theorize a localized reality collapse, a controlled implosion to contain the fallout of a failed prime integration and harvest all available flow energy." "Controlled?" Alasdair yelled, his vision a nauseating, strobing hellscape of impossible angles and collapsing dimensions. This ain't F** king-controlled. This is the whole bloody world turning inside out. He was right. The walls of the chamber were no longer stable. They flowed and warped like liquid shadow, revealing glimpses of elsewhere. Frozen tundra, swirling nebulae, cities of fire, all flickering in and out of existence. Ayana was screaming, not from her usual voices, but from the sheer, overwhelming wrongness of it all. Her own flow, the antenna for unseen things, was now picking up the death rattles of 1,000 pocket dimensions bleeding into their own. It's breaking. The walls between, they're all breaking. Their escape from the integration chamber was a desperate flight through a facility that was actively unmaking itself. Corridors they had just traversed were now gaping maws into swirling chaos. Gravity fluctuated wildly. Time itself seemed to stutter and loop, Zara's horrified gasps confirming that the temporal distortions were no longer just in her head. One moment they were running down a metal hallway, the next it was a primeval forest, then a landscape of pure crystalline geometry, then back to the shuddering failing Legion architecture. Prefect Vance, or what remained of her true alien form, a being of pure intricate light and shadow, was locked in a death grip with the dissipating, screaming consciousness of Chimera Prime. Their battle was no longer physical, but a war of raw flow of competing wills at the collapsing heart of the facility, and it was dragging everything down with it. The surface, Ronin yelled, trying to keep them oriented, trying to remember the path they had taken into this nightmare. We have to reach the surface before this whole damn island becomes a black hole. They fought their way upwards, not against chimeras now, but against reality itself. Tenoch, with Nia still in his arms, smashed through walls that shimmered with alien energies, his every blow a defiant roar against the encroaching void. Alasdair, ironically, found a strange clarity in the utter chaos. The world outside his head now matched the world within, and he moved with a reckless, almost joyful abandon, his disruptive flow tearing open escape routes through the disintegrating structure. Nova, despite the sensory overload, managed to track the faint energy signature of the original tunnel entrance, her logic a fragile anchor in the storm. Ayana's voices, now a chorus of pure, unadulterated terror, paradoxically guided them away from the worst of the spatial anomalies, their fear a surprisingly effective compass. Zara, however, was struggling. The temporal energies unleashed by the collapsing singularity were tearing at her, her visions no longer fleeting glimpses, but overwhelming, immersive realities. She saw not just the end of Kodiak, but the ripple effect. She saw the claw symbol, Vance's symbol, igniting across the globe like a vast, interconnected network coming online. She saw the harvest beginning not as a single event, but as a creeping, insidious blight. The Omega Protocol wasn't just a containment measure for this facility, it was a trigger. They burst out of the hidden doorway onto the desolate Kodiak beach, just as the cliff face behind them groaned, buckled, and then imploded inwards with a soundless, sickening finality, dragging a vast swathe of the forest and the mountainside down with it into a swirling vortex of impossible, non-Euclidean geometry. Where the Legion facility had stood, there was now only a shimmering black wound in the fabric of reality, a scar that pulsed with an unnatural, hungry light. The Kodiak singularity, battered, bleeding, their flows stretched to the breaking point, the 7 Vipers stood on the frozen shore staring at the impossible. They had survived. They had escaped. But what had they unleashed? As the last echoes of the implosion faded, Zara sank to her knees, her eyes fixed on the northern horizon, where the aurora borealis usually danced. But tonight, the lights were different. They were harsher, more defined, and they were forming patterns. Intricate geometric patterns. And within them, repeated over and over, stretching across the entire expanse of the sky, visible even in the dim pre-dawn light, was a 3-pronged claw. It wasn't just a symbol anymore. It was a declaration. Ronin followed her gaze, his face grim. "What is it, Zara?" "What do you see now?" Her voice was a hoarse whisper, filled with a dawning global horror. It's not over. Kodiak, it was just the first note. The song, Vance's song, it's only just begun. The harvest, it's happening. Everywhere, the Vipers looked at each other, 7 broken souls on a frozen beach, the architects of their own desperate survival, and perhaps the unwitting heralds of a new, terrible age. The mystery of Kodiak Island was solved, but it had only unveiled a far greater, more terrifying one. Prefect Alara Vance might be gone, consumed by her own creation, but her design, her Omega Protocol, was now a living, breathing terror sweeping across a world utterly unprepared for the silent, systematic harvest of its soul. Their saga as outcasts was over. Their saga as something else was about to begin. And the world, blissfully unaware, spun on towards a dawn that might never truly break. Saga of the Outcast, a goddess's epilogue on broken playthings. Chapter 27, The Unfolding Echo. Perspective, Quantum Goddess, Quinn. Ah, my little vipers. Such a delightfully venomous appellation for a clutch of shattered, flailing souls. Their saga, a brief, violent spasm in the grand, indifferent theatre of existence, has reached a pause. A caesura in their symphony of suffering. And from my vantage, where timelines fray and possibilities scream, it was also predictably, deliciously chaotic. Do you recall their genesis? 7 exquisitely flawed little organisms, each a unique testament to the universe's boundless creativity in crafting torment. Ronin Seto, his infantile need for control, blossoming into a rather effective, if crude, manipulative artistry. Ayana Baptiste, her mind a perpetually ringing antenna for the universe's most inconvenient and terrifying static. Tenoch Cardenas, a stoic, handsome vessel for a nihilistic urge so profound it threatened to unmake him from within, a miniature black hole of angst. Nova Kim, my little void, who achieved a chilling, almost elegant emptiness by simply excising the messy, inconvenient variable of emotion. Zara Khan, her perception of your rigid, linear time shattered in glittering, catastrophic shards, a living paradox. Alasdair Finch, for whom reality itself became a treacherous, ever-shifting geometric betrayal, his anger a constant, crackling discharge against a world that refused to hold its shape. And Nia Adebayo, the empathic wound, a raw, open nerve absorbing the amplified agony of everyone around her, a tiny beacon of vicarious despair. Oh, they were masterpieces of broken potential, each a unique song of dissonance. Then came Chiesa and her light facility, that sterile, well-meaning little box where she attempted to catalogue, comprehend and, most amusingly, control these beautiful expressions of untamed flow. Like trying to bottle a hurricane with a teacup, their training was less about discipline and more about the spectacular ways in which their inherent chaos resisted such mundane impositions. They learned, yes, but not what Chiesa intended. They learned the contours of their cages, and the delightful, destructive ways their powers could rattle the bars. Naturally, the Legion, those tiresome devotees of absolute uninspired order, could not resist meddling. Their clumsy attack on Chiesa's little school for the uniquely afflicted was the catalyst, the spark that ignited the Viper's desperate flight. And Zara, my little shattered oracle, her mind already a canvas of future horrors, provided the first, terrifying brushstrokes of the Legion's grand, ugly design. Their escape was a masterpiece of flailing desperation. They dubbed themselves the Vipers, a rather fitting moniker for their sudden, if reluctant, cohesion. Following the breadcrumbs of Zara's fractured visions, they burrowed into the forgotten recesses of the Legion's ambition. First, that quaint, abandoned laboratory in the El Dorado National Forest, a place of old ghosts and unsettling preliminary sketches of the Legion's monstrous artistry. There, they encountered Subject Scavenger, that charming little automaton cobbled together from spare parts and screaming, fragmented consciousness. A delightful amuse-bouche before the main course. Ayana's voices led them to the sick heart that corrupted little data core, which in turn screamed a new destination into her already overcrowded mind, Kodiak Island, Alaska. A suitably dramatic and desolate stage for the next act. And what an act it was. Prefect Alara Vance, the self-proclaimed architect of Project Chimera. Not quite Legion, not quite human. An ancient, cold intellect draped in a Legion uniform, her ambition a beautifully sterile strain of cosmic horror. Her facility on Kodiak wasn't abandoned, it pulsed with the cold, rhythmic life of her perfected designs. My Vipers, bless their chaotic little hearts, stumbled right into her menagerie. They discovered her Chimeras, those sleek biomechanical predators, and the true horrifying purpose of the harvest, the unmaking of individuals, the siphoning of their unique flows, all to feed Vance's grand egomaniacal vision of a unified, silent, and utterly boring reality. The capture of Zara and Naya was inevitable. Such potent, unstable specimens were irresistible to a connoisseur of consciousness like Vance. The remaining Vipers, in their predictable, organic fervour, launched a rescue. Oh, the sound and fury. Tenoch, a walking negation. Alasdair, a human reality distortion field. Ronin, attempting to impose his will on a situation spiralling into delightful bedlam. Nova, a ghost of logic amidst the emotional maelstrom. Ayana, her fear a surprisingly effective early warning system. The integration chamber. A stage for true transcendence, or so Vance believed. Zara, my temporal anomaly, her flow hijacked by something vast and ancient, became a nexus of unravelling timelines. Nia, the empath, became a weapon, her amplified emotions fueling the very chimeras meant to subdue them. And then, Chimera Prime itself. Vance's magnum opus, a gestalt of stolen flows, rising to claim its place, only to be undone by its own fractured, betrayed consciousness, and Tenoch's beautifully timed, self-immolating surge of power. The Kodiak Singularity. A fittingly dramatic name for the facility's spectacular implosion. Vance, or the ancient light and shadow entity that wore her form, consumed in a final, furious embrace with her own imperfect creation. And my vipers, battered, bleeding but still twitching, spilled out onto a frozen beach, only to witness the true, horrifying dawn of Vance's Omega Protocol. The three-pronged claw, her symbol, her network, igniting across the globe, a silent, creeping declaration that the harvest was not just a localized experiment but a planetary initiative. And so, they stand, my 7 broken little playthings, on the precipice of a world actively being unmade and remade in a design far more insidious than they could have imagined. Their individual sagas of pain have coalesced into a collective symphony of unwilling agency. The horror of their pasts is now dwarfed by the horror of their present, and the terrifying mystery of a future where they, the ultimate outcasts, might be the only flawed, chaotic sparks capable of resisting a universe succumbing to sterile, ordered perfection. Their journey from the shadows of their origins to the chilling, global twilight of the Omega Protocol has been diverting. But it is, as mortals say, merely the end of the beginning. The universe has an insatiable appetite for such delightful ironies, and I, Quinn, shall continue to watch. For the echoes of their unfolding destiny promise a cacophony far more entertaining than any I have witnessed in eons. Let the next saga of these vipers, these agents of beautiful, terrible chaos, commence. The stage is set. The audience waits, and the flow always finds a way to surprise.